which was really for American consumption, or, hey, look at us, this is the new class order in Britain. These are the people that matter. These are the movers and shakers.
Pop stars like Ray Davies, boxers like Terry Downes, and filmmakers like Roman Polanski. The old London society seemed to have gone. Now at the parties everyone wanted to go to were artists like David Hockney and actresses like Susanna York, journalists, PR men, photographers and hairdressers.
A really interesting group of people who, some of them, if you like, monosyllabic, but they still had something more interesting to say to each other than the social, samey groups that used to meet before that. Doug Hayward and Michael Caine, two so-called cockneys. They were very much part of the London scene. They were both successful. It was interesting that Doug, who had been in the Navy, had come out and become a tailor's apprentice and actually used to go around with belts of cloth and make people's suits in their city offices. And the reason, he's not just a very, very good tailor, but he's an extremely interesting and entertaining man. And so really going to Doug's shop became almost like going to a club, a lot more interesting than going to some English club, I think, tell you.
Doug Hayward's aristocratic clients treated him more like a friend than a tailor, something which would never have happened in the past.
Well, they all became friends, basically. They all became friends of mine. And, well, not all of them, but I mean, a lot of them did. And I found myself getting invited away for country weekends, and come and stay on my boat and things like that sort of stuff. But the thing about that is not to do it. It's nice to be asked, but don't do it. Because then they realise you're not so special after all when they spend a bit of time with you.
Why did they ask, do you think?
Well, because I was the mascot at the time. I mean, I was a little cockney tailor around the corner. I was only 27 or something.
I would hate it if people thought that I was his tame peer or he was my tame cockney. Life is not like that. I sometimes get extremely angry when I think people are as patronising as that. He's always been a good mate, and it doesn't matter where he came from. I think the great thing about the 60s was it gave he and I access to each other. Now that hadn't happened before. It would have been much more difficult until this class barrier, so-called class barrier, came crashing down.
Hayward was one of a group of working-class men who found themselves in the limelight. Others included journalist Michael Parkinson and photographer Terry O'Neill. The change was so dramatic that they couldn't believe it was for real.
It wasn't going to last. That you're going to have to go back. When you're 25, you're going to have to do what your mum wanted, work in the bank.
Absolutely.
It's true.
You're waiting for a tap on the shoulder all the time. Waiting for someone to say, come on, you've got away with it for about 20 years, I've been watching you, come back where you belong.
Yeah.
And so you actually, although you could never quite do it, you always imagine you could. It's all at the back of your mind. It can't last. Good game going on, and I'm winning at the moment.
Part of the fun was imagining we were stuffing the aristocracy. But they have had centuries of experience of stuffing us. I think they're ahead of the game, actually. Yeah.
I never saw class really as an issue until the 60s told us that it didn't exist. Or voices in the 60s told us that it didn't exist, which just reminded us how much it did. And we all thought we went through an extraordinary classless time. We didn't at all.
Lord Lichfield socialised with models, but he married the daughter of the Duke of Westminster. When it came to marriage, the aristocracy still preferred to stick together.
I just think it is easier if you are going to ultimately have to live in a background which is prepared. I mean, we've seen it happen in the royal family. If you don't adapt to the system sure isn't going to adapt to you. So even though it may have changed, it hasn't changed so much that decade or generation after generation of the same sort of thing going on, however stuffy you may think it is, it still does actually have a meaning and a bearing on a girl who's going to marry into it. She's got sort of to toe the line and learn the rules.
The whole question of marriage and succession remained as important to the aristocracy as ever. As in most families, at Haddow House in Aberdeenshire, the strict rules of inheritance have kept the estate and titles together for centuries. David Gordon, the 4th Marquis of Aberdeen, married June Boissier, a music student. Together they founded a music festival, which still continues at Haddo.
Okay.
June didn't come from a titled or landed family herself. She was the daughter of the headmaster of Harrow.
Right. Good. You all got the serenade, have you? Right. Okay.
For some 40 years, June Lady Aberdeen has run Haddo with great energy. But sadly, she couldn't have children. Eventually, they adopted. First a daughter, Mary, and then 2 boys and another girl. They went against some family opposition to do so because these children could never inherit either title or estate. Under the rules of aristocratic succession, only blood counts. By aristocratic standards, the children had a normal upbringing, but the fact of their adoption was never far from the surface.
I think we all suffer from it because I don't think children like being different. And I remember Sarah and I going to a party in a castle quite near here, and all the nannies were sort of behind the children's chairs making sure they had the bread and butter before the jelly and the chocolate cake. And there were 2 mothers discussing us as if we couldn't hear. I mean, people always assume that children are deaf, I think. And the little Gordon girls, of course, you know they're adopted. And it's almost as if there was something slightly not quite right about it. And I think we grew up feeling that we were sort of second best in a way.
If you think how many titles have descended through the wrong side of the blanket, I think it's a great shame. I just don't mind. I mean, now I did mind, of course, very much. It's a great sorrow that you can't produce children, but on the other hand, I've had so much else, you see.
When June's husband died, the title could not pass to their adopted son. Instead, it went sideways, eventually to her husband's brother Alistair and his wife.
Well, a lot of people round and about said, look here, what on earth's going on? Because we started off as Mr. and Mrs. Gordon, then we were Lord and Lady Alistair Gordon, then we were Marquis and Marchioness of Aberdeen. And,
I think the shops and Pangbourne thought we were inventing it all.
I don't know, they thought we were bringing it up as we went along.
Yes, anything to get a bit better, you know, get a better deal.
See, I've got 10 titles, and the courtesy one of Earl of Haddo goes to our son, and then his elder son is the Viscount, one of the I've got 2 Viscountcies. They're just a sort of a string of titles which I have, and one, so to speak, dishes them out to the appropriate people.
The current Lord and Lady Aberdeen chose not to move back to Haddo, but stayed in their house in Berkshire, where they each have a studio. He's an accomplished botanical painter, and Lady Aberdeen is a ceramicist. As the granddaughter of an earl herself, the 6th Lady Aberdeen believes succession by blood is important.
It's just one of the rules. And I think if you've got a family who've been in possession of a place for a very long time, you want to keep the bloodline going. I mean, I feel very strongly about that. I think it's very important because you've got to certain sort of characteristics about families which have just got to go on through, if you can. I mean, it's lovely if you can.
To avoid death duties, the estate was passed to their son Alexander while he was still a schoolboy. In due course, he will inherit the full title.
Actually, it's worked out rather well because our son, I think, is going to be very good at doing the job. And there wasn't anybody else. We were the only ones with any children, so that it was a bit of luck, really.
In Britain, large estates and titles have been held together from generation to generation by the strict rule of male primogeniture. Here, the eldest son inherits everything. On the continent, estates are split up among the children. The British rule of aristocratic succession is ruthless, but it works. But for June Lady Aberdeen, the fact that her adopted children cannot inherit so much as a title still rankles.
The only sad thing is that a life peer's children can be called honourable. The legitimately adopted children of a marquis can be called nothing, and they have to explain to everybody. But if they could just have an honourable like a life peer, then they wouldn't have to explain why they've got nothing. I think they've got over it now, but the youngest one minded very much. I don't know why he did, but he did.
The aristocracy continues to take the concept of breeding seriously. They believe their genetic inheritance has stood them in good stead for many centuries and will continue to do so in the modern world.
I think you have to remember that the aristocracy, the peerage, the nobility, whatever you like to call it, are a very much more resilient lot than you would actually give them credit for. You will find that they are a lot tougher. I've learnt this as I've got older. I actually include myself, and I'm quite surprised at how resilient we are. And I think that we are less daunted by the onset of a potential socialist government than most people think we are.
Looking at the aristocracy up to the present day next Wednesday on BBC Two. That's at the same time, 9 o'clock.